So welcome everyone. My name is Megan Matheson. I am one of the leads of the Canadian Marine Shipping Risk Forum Community of Practice, along with Ron Polo Dalhousie. And Ron, if you want to give a wave, is here. And Clear Seas and Miopar joined together with support from Exact Earth back in 2019 to launch this community of practice to be a place to to be a place for people who are working in or conducting research on shipping risk to share their knowledge, network, learn more, and just have a sense of what's going on in the world of shipping risk, because there is quite a bit going on. And so we've got a number of efforts underway, one of which is sharing information through this webinar series. And we also run an annual workshop, which for the last few years has been focused on the development of an inventory of different projects and people and organizations and efforts on shipping risk research and studies. So that is continuing and will be the topic of the workshop this year coming up, as we foresee it to be a very useful resource for people to be able to search and add information to, so that it's a comprehensive and openly available set of materials for anybody who is doing this kind of work and wants to learn more. So I'm going to now introduce our agenda for today. So our first presentation is from Emmanuel Rossetti with Spire. And then after a short break, we'll have a presentation from Rob Marshy at GSTS. And there'll be opportunity for questions following each of these presentations. So please make a note of anything you may wish to ask. So just to move into introductions, and in terms of asking questions, feel free to type anything into the chat or raise your hand using the reactions feature. And you can either unmute yourself and ask your question directly if that's something you are comfortable with, or just I can read out questions that come into the chat when we get to the Q&A part. So our first speaker today is Emmanuel Rossetti, a sales engineer for maritime at Spire Global. He is both a French and Canadian citizen with an engineering degree in geomatics and an international MBA. He's worked for the Canadian Coast Guard as a senior marine navigation analyst on various projects, leveraging AIS data, including emergency towing, whales protection measures, and a review of shore-based communication systems. So very pleased to have Emmanuel here to talk to us about AIS.
All right, thank you very much, Megan. I will start sharing my screen now. So thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm currently located in Europe, in Amsterdam, but even if it's a bit late for me, I'm very happy to be talking with you today in Canada. So I'll be talking to you today a bit about how to apply AIS data to mine shipping risk. So my name is Emmanuel Rossetti, as Megan mentioned. I'm a sales engineer in maritime for Spire. And mostly today, what we will be focusing on during this short presentation, I'll be starting with a little bit of introduction, both of who we are at Spire, what we do, and what AIS is, for those who don't know what it is. And then I'll go over a few use cases of AIS for enhancing situational awareness or mitigating risks in the maritime industry. That might be a little bit unusual cases or a little bit off cases. And then I want to close, open up a little bit towards something that is very relevant, especially in Canada, which is about navigating in the Arctic shipping, for example. So, first of all, Spire, who are we? Well, Spire is a company that has been founded in 2012 in a very typical Silicon Valley story in a garage in California with our three co-founders that have always been very passionate about space, and they wanted to see what was possible to do with nano satellites. Their premises was that satellite and the new space industry is evolving and developing the same way as computers were developing in the 20th century. And we'll be able to do more and more with less and less expenses and with smaller and smaller sizes. It's basically following the Moore's law. And so what they did is using nanosatellites. So for those who don't know, a nanosatellite is basically, if you look at a box that encapsulates a bottle of wine, that's approximately the size, so 30 centimeters tall. And what it encapsulates is basically like a computer, like your phone with multiple sensors, and send that into space. So they wanted to see what was possible to do with that and how to access data from space to help make our world a safer, cleaner, more prosperous, and more equitable place. So since then, Spire has grown quite a lot. Now we are a global company with over 375 employees from 40 different countries and offices in 3 different continents. We really use our data, and we now have a constellation which is the largest multi-purpose constellation of satellites with about 600 different solution customers. We're providing all of that, and we're providing a lot of different data. So we currently have, I'll show you quickly here, 5 different business units. So obviously the maritime one, which is the one that we're going to focus on today, it's the main one, the historical one, because in the open seas, it appeared quite naturally that satellite would be a solution to solve problems that we would have before. So we provide AIS data. We are collecting, analyzing, delivering AIS data. We are innovating in this field as well with dynamic AIS to solve some industry challenges and give customers a competitive advantage in the world that we live in today. We provide this data to different systems, through TCP feed, APIs, or file delivery systems for different customers, for them to develop application and use it to better the world. We also have other business units. So we have aviation, which has a system very similar to AIS, but for planes. So if you're like tracking your plane at the airport, seeing where your next plane is going to come and arrive, this is the same thing. It's using ADSB. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. We have a weather business unit, which I think is very relevant to us today. Everything in the maritime industry is highly correlated with the marine weather, and we're providing data through our satellite to better models. And this data is actually used and leverages a lot of information from radio occultation from GNSS signals. And that helps provide very accurate models and predictions for both marine weather, but also land weather. We also have Earth Information business unit, which is more about analyzing data on the soil, on the coverage. So for example, we do some analysis on ice coverage in some areas, but we also look at soil moisture using also signals from our satellites. And finally, we have a business unit that's a little bit out of the box here. It's called Spire Space Services, excuse me, for which we offer space as a service, basically. So if you have an idea, if you have an algorithm, a sensor that you want to try out, that you want to send to space to try on a satellite, but you don't have the expertise, you don't have maybe the expenses to the budget to do that, well, we do have the capacity, we do have the knowledge, and we can allow you to put your system on board of our satellites and provide the data that it collects through APIs, through our system, through our organization. So that makes space a lot more available for a lot of people in the industry nowadays. So that's very interesting and that's very exciting. But let's get back to the maritime aspect today. That's our main focus, I think. And so Megan mentioned ExactEarth. I'm sure probably some of you already know about ExactEarth. ExactEarth is a Canadian company that was founded in Cambridge, Ontario, and that was recently actually acquired by Spire in November 2021. ExactEarth was mostly our main, like our biggest competitor on the market. And with Spire and ExactEarth combined, we now provide the most complete leading AIS data provider in the world. And we have over 24/7 coverage of the world. We have over 290 million daily AIS messages through this combination of services. We are seeing up to 280,000 unique MEMSs per day and above that. And MEMSs is a unique identifier for vessels. And we have above 165 satellites in operation, and that we continue on developing all the time. We're working really in a very agile way in which we are developing new satellites and putting them into orbit every 6 months or every quarter. So it's very dynamic, and it's how we perform to stay the best on the market. So I did a few slides on what is AIS now. I don't know what the level of everyone in this call is about the knowledge of AIS. So AIS, what it is, it stands for Automatic Identification System. So it's a vessel tracking system. It's used for ship-to-ship, ship-to-shore, and shore-to-ship communication. What I understand by that is, what I mean by that, is that each vessel that has an AIS transponder on board can communicate to other ships around it that are within the line of sight, information about its position, its voyage, its static information about the name, what IMO number they are, what dimensions they have, what type of vessel it is. But it can also have communication ship to shore. So it can communicate this information to antennas, terrestrial receivers that are on the shore. For example, the Canadian Coast Guard would monitor that in the Canadian waters, but port authorities can do that. Some other private entities can also collect this information. You can also have short ship communication the other way. So you can have broadcast of information, such as broadcast of notice to miners from the Canadian Coast Guard. You can have broadcast of weather information in the St. Lawrence Seaway with application-specific messages. So it's really an integrated communication system that was originally developed and mandated by the IMO, International Maritime Organization, as a collision avoidance system. So the main goal originally was to avoid risk, avoid collision, and allow ships to communicate their position without the need of, I would say not without the need, but in addition to other systems such as radar, such as communication through VHF systems. So it is a really key component in the maritime industry, and it has different regulations. So the IMO requires some vessels, those that exceed 300 gross tons, to carry AIS transponders. I know that some areas in some countries like Canada are requiring it for different vessels as well, for vessels above 150 gross tonnage that have more than 12 people on board and on international voyages. But other vessels can carry AIS transponder and have access to this information, and other organizations can use AIS for other purposes. So it all uses radio frequencies, but we have limitation with AIS, which remains that the topography that's around us, the terrain, can block the signal, can block the radio frequency signal the same way as when you're on your phone, you might have like blockages depending on the area that you live in. So it's the same system, and that's why it becomes very complicated in some areas to have access to AIS data from a shore perspective, because you can put an antenna, but have obstructions, which are land, buildings, or others that block the signal to come through. And that's where satellite AIS is really, really useful, because it has access of this data from above, and you can see pretty much everything. So I wanted to go also a little bit into two things that you might hear if you're talking about AIS, and clarifying it a little bit. We are often hearing about Class A AIS and Class B AIS. So the difference between that is the difference of transponders that are on board of vessels. Class A AIS typically are more expensive. They emit at higher power, but they also provide more capabilities. So they provide more information. Here I put a few examples of what it provides: position, speed, course, heading, maneuver, but it also provides static information and voyages information such as IMO, call sign, name, vessel type, destination, draft, or dimensions. These messages are emitted at different frequencies depending on the speed of the vessel, depending on whether it's moored or anchored or not. And it has different frequencies, but depending on if it's positional messages that are emitted or static and voyage-related messages. I put some numbers here. It's usually the type that is used by all large merchant vessels, so like cargo, container, tankers will use this type of AIS. Class B AIS is a little bit of a cheaper transmitter in terms of cost, still provides very good information, provides positional information, provides static information. It has different frequency, it has lower power wattage, so it's less easy to pick it up from long distances, but it still provides a very good tool for pleasure craft, let's say small fishing vessels and smaller vessels like this. We have over 27 types of messages. I'm not going to go through all of them today, but I noted a few more. So base stations, aids navigations. The Coast Guard, for example, will provide information about different aids navigation, either fixed or virtual aids navigation. SAR, we also have binary messages, such as application-specific messages. The St. Lawrence Seaway, for example, using the binary messages to communicate weather information, one of them. But most of the time, we're looking at positional messages for this information. And that's what I'm displaying on those two heat maps that I've displayed here. I wanted to compare a little bit what's the difference between terrestrial AIS and satellite AIS. What you can see here on the left, it's both our 24-hour extract in the middle of January. So we don't see a lot of Arctic traffic at this time of the year. But you see that really the concentration of messages for terrestrial is near the shore. It's about 40 nautical miles, the range of a terrestrial antenna. Whereas the satellite AIS really covers all the other areas, the open seas, middle of the Pacific, the Atlantic. Also near the shore, we can also access some information. The one place where satellite AIS has some limitation is in high traffic zone. So for example, the South China Sea, which is a very heavy traffic zone, is crowded, and you can have collision of messages in this kind of area because of the footprint of the satellite vision. And that's where the importance of a new technology that we are using, which is called dynamic AIS, is really relevant. Because in dynamic AIS, what we did is we used fleets of vessels. We put some AIS receivers on those vessels to collect information around them and make them travel in those heavy traffic areas and communicate this information through satellite to our systems. So it really is like a good uplift in some of those heavy traffic zones. But let's see now a little bit like few examples of how AIS can be used to mitigate some risks in the maritime industry. I will not cover all of them. It's not an exhaustive list. I will not go over all the classic, like collision, striking, grounding, for example, but I'll get some use cases from some of our customers. So the first one I wanted to touch about was about tackling illegal fishing. We know from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization that about 34% of fisheries are overfished. It's really a major threat to achieving sustainable fisheries. That's why we need a better surveillance system, we need better reporting, enforcement of regulation of commercial fishing. Traditionally, vessel monitoring system, VMS, are used for monitoring this type of activities. But we also see that some vessels are trying to hide what the activity is through VMS. I'm not saying that AIS is the perfect solution for that, because AIS can also be turned off or disabled for some people who are doing something that is deemed as illegal. But it helps already have more information about what's happening on our waters. And Global Fishing Watch, which is one of our customers, is applying Inspire's AIS to help identify fishing activity and promote transparency in this domain. So that's a really good, important approach for AIS data. Another one is about mitigating risk of oil and gas offshore. We know that the oil and gas will continue to be a major source of world's energy into the 21st century. We are transitioning to new energies, but we still have reliance on oil and gas. And we are seeing currently with what's happening in Eastern Europe, that this is even more true nowadays. So it's really imperative for the oil and gas industry to find new areas to extract oil and gas from offshore, for example. The problem is that it causes a big risk if anything happens on those offshore stations or on any of the assets that those companies have. So that's why it's really key for them to have tools to monitor what is going on around their vessels, around their offshore station, to ensure that there is no accident that would be a major damage for the ecosystem and for the economy as well. we all have in memory what happened with BP in the Gulf of Texas. So it's really something that where AIS is a great asset and allows to have access to information that is way beyond the shore level, especially for the satellite AIS. The next example is one that's very, very important to me, especially because when I worked at the Canadian Coast Guard, I worked on multiple projects for protecting the different marine mammals in Canada. We had some issues with North Atlantic right whales in the Gulf of St. Lawrence that were dying at an alarming rate, and so protected species. We had South Rhodesian killer whales in the Strait of Juan de Fuca near Vancouver that also are disturbed by the activity of human activity. We know that marine industry covers 80% of the global trade by volume, so it's really important to keep our economy striving with the marine industry. But we also need to see how we can do that while protecting our fauna and our flora and make sure that we have the right tools in place to do that. So to preserve those areas, preserve marine protected areas, preserve particularly sensitive sea areas, we need to have systems to monitor what activity is going on around those. Sometimes, for example, Transport Canada will define areas of no-go interim sanctuary zone for allowing some marine mammal or some species to recover in some areas, to not be disturbed by the underwater noise, to not be disturbed by strikings from large vessels. So using AIS data in this case is really key to monitor, to make sure to alert vessels as well that we see arriving near a zone like that or arriving above a certain speed in some zone like that. So it's really a key tool to make sure that we ensure that our oceans keep thriving in the future and recover from the stress that we are putting on them. Another aspect would be about reducing emissions and protecting resources for port operations and fleet management particularly. We have more and more traffic. We're seeing that nowadays with our global economy, we need to have things just in time. We have Amazon deliveries crossing around the world, and whenever something happens, whenever there's a vessel that was stuck in the Suez Canal a little while back, that disrupts our entire supply chain. And that creates a lot of issues in terms of providing the right resources to deliver goods around the world. And having AIS data helps those companies to plan ahead, to have mitigation plans, to analyze maybe historical traffic in different shipping lanes to identify what is the best path for them to deliver products. And it also helps optimize the traffic, optimize the delivery of goods, to stop wasting time waiting for a passage in a channel or in a specific route or at a specific port that's congested. So it's really key to monitor that and to mitigate those economic risks as well, and also environmental risk due to the use of different fuels. So those are some of the examples I have from customers, from past experience. But I wanted to also open up to the future and what we're seeing. So the expectations are that Arctic sea lanes will be regularly free of summer ice by 2035. That's basically tomorrow. We are seeing that as a complex change in a very fragile environment, in a very difficult place. And that comes with both challenges, because this is a very fragile area that is protected, that is a place that is a carbon sink for all our emissions. But at the same time, it also opens up new opportunities, new route opportunities. We're talking about the Northwest Passage route. The Northeast Passage is already used by Russia quite heavily. So we will have challenges in terms of how to define what goes in those areas while protecting the wildlife habitat and the native communities that live in the Arctic and Antarctic, and making sure that at the same time we can provide a safe shipping and a green shipping in those areas while monitoring assets correctly. The Arctic is really a difficult place. It's still a difficult place to access, and it's very dangerous to navigate through the Arctic. And any resources that we have, that being emergency towing capacities or ice breaking services or any kind of other services to mine are very far away. It's a giant area that's quite empty. So if anything happens there, it could be a disastrous effect. So it's really important to have a picture of everything that's happening in those areas. And it's very difficult to have an infrastructure in place to monitor that correctly the same way as we have near Vancouver, near Montreal, which has already electricity infrastructure, which has road infrastructure. If we want to install a terrestrial AIS antenna in the Arctic, it's quite difficult. You have to think about the power, you have to think about the transmission of the data to your data centers, and you have to think about the maintenance. So all of that makes it very complex, and that's where satellite AIS can really help in those situations. So this is something I wanted to mention just as an opening at the end, because new opportunities will come up, new challenges will come up, and we're seeing every day new ways that people and companies want to use AIS data that we provide to make better decisions and to hopefully make a better world. So thank you very much. I'm happy to get any questions if we have time. I'm not sure how long I took today.
We've definitely got some time for questions. Thanks so much, Emmanuel. It was a great overview and some interesting case studies to think about how AIS can give us a better picture of the maritime environment. So I'll open it up if anybody has any questions to ask of Emmanuel. And seeing one from Megan Carr. Megan, if you'd like to unmute and ask directly, you can, or I'm happy to read it out.
Sure, I can read it. So I had a question. So you mentioned that turning off AIS is a big challenge associated with IUU fishing. And I was wondering if Spire collects satellite images or other data streams that might be helpful to addressing that problem.
So we do not collect any satellite images at Spire. We do have some systems that we are putting in place. There's a lot of activities going on nowadays with radio frequency detection. So we are looking into that detection of dark vessels that turn off their AIS for illegal activities. We do not have currently a product, but it's definitely something that we are working on, and because we're seeing a lot of needs around that.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
I'm seeing a hand from Samuel Mansfield.
Yeah, hello. Thanks, Emmanuel, for the presentation. Super interesting. I have a question about the capabilities of satellite AIS within the Arctic. I'm just looking at, I took a screenshot of one of your slides that compared the satellite to terrestrial AIS. And I noticed that even in the satellite AIS picture, there's hardly any tracks in the Arctic. Yes. So I'm just wondering if that's because there's just currently no coverage through Spire in the Arctic or focus there, or if that's still a limitation.
Oh, that's a very good question. Thank you very much. So actually, that's I mentioned this snapshot has been taken for 24 hours in January. So as you can imagine, in January, the traffic in the Arctic is non-existent due to the ice coverage there. Usually the season in the Arctic, some people can correct me, but it goes from May to December. I think this snapshot was taken in January. I should have taken another time, but we definitely see some traffic and we definitely have coverage in the Arctic. Our orbits of satellites do go through the Arctic poles quite frequently, so we have actually a very good coverage in those areas.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Okay.
Next, seeing Ron Pillow.
Thank you. That was a very good presentation. You mentioned shore-to-ship use of AIS, and I don't know that much about it, so we maybe don't have time here for a big description. I know about the concept, but I didn't know it was actually being done or if it was feasible technically. So is that a growing use of AIS?
I wouldn't say it's a growing use. It's a capability of AIS, definitely. There are some areas, so the Central Seaway is one of the precursors in terms of the usage of binary messages, using it for application-specific messages to share information to ships coming in and also receive information. We have, yes, there are some usage mainly for government. So the Canadian Coast Guard, for example, will emit some messages for ATON positions for vessels to know where the aids to navigations are, whether they are fixed aids to navigation or virtual aids to navigation. There are broadcasts of notice to miners that are shared this way as well. So it is a use case. I've not seen it as a widely used capacity of AIS at the moment beyond the scope of government usage.
Okay, thank you.
We do have a few more minutes for questions if anybody has any others. And while we're waiting to see if anybody's got another question, I was wondering, Emmanuel, can you talk a little bit more about the use of AIS as sort of the geofencing aspect to alert people when ships are coming into, say, a marine protected area or a vessel slowdown area? Can you talk about how that works and if it's being used anywhere at the moment and how effective that has been?
Yes, definitely. That's a very interesting question and one that I like particularly because it also touches with some of my background as a geomatics engineer. So the way geofences work, basically, we are defining areas of interest. So, for example, a marine protected area, a specific zone, and through some analysis of the data directly, either through a direct feed or through historical data, we're able to see when a position enters this specific zone and provide an alert. So, for example, through ShipView, the viewer application of ExactEarth Spire now, we have this possibility of creating alerts automatically. So you can draw and define your own zone, your own polygon, define your filters, say like I want to see only container vessels. And if a container vessel enters this area, I want to be alerted right away about that application. So this is something that is being done in the geospatial world quite frequently. There is that capability of doing it. And yeah, I think it's a very interesting case. And we're seeing a lot of our customers requesting this capability and using it for their environment. I see a few more questions, a few hands raised.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll go to Forrest Garland first, and then Paul, and then Anoma Sarah has a question.
Yeah, thank you for a very interesting overview. I was just wondering, like you mentioned that you do historical analysis of AIS data. Are you also, do you have applications or use cases where you combine AIS data with other data? For instance, weather data or other, other data sets?
So yeah, there are use cases. At Spire, we do not do particularly the analysis. We provide the data for our customers really to do this type of analysis. But I've seen definitely use cases where people have extracted historical data of AIS. They have used also historical data for striking collision, for example, to do modeling of risks in certain areas. And I know like some of the people working at the Transport Canada that I think are on this call are particularly expert on this aspect. But there are things going on there. There is also the usage of weather information. So as you mentioned, weather information historically, and looking at the AIS transits of vessels to see whether some kind of meteorological event has had an impact on the decision of the captain to change its route, to see, so it could be used for example, for insurance purposes, it could be used for planning purposes, it could be used for route planning, yes, in the future. So there are like multiple ways of using historical data, indeed, with other layers of information to extract insights.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Paul.
Hi, Emmanuel. Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, my question was about the relaying of AIS messages between ships to shore stations. My basic understanding is that some AIS receivers and transmitters are equipped with this ability to, they receive another ship's signal, but then they're able to relay that so that it extends the the range of terrestrial AIS receivers, so that without needing to resort to satellite, you can still receive position and heading information from ships that are beyond the range of the terrestrial receiver because they're benefiting from the relaying effect from other ships. Is that true? And if so, is it in use? And does it work? Can you expand a bit more on that?
Definitely, yes. Thank you for that question. It's very interesting. So yes, there are different types of application in that sense. There are some vessels that collect AIS data and that relay it from their location using different communication protocols for example, VTS systems. We have created and innovated in a way with defining the dynamic AIS aspect, which is similar approach. So where we have fleets of vessels that have those AIS receivers on board that collect this information that do not relay it where they are currently located to expand the horizon, but where they transmit this information through satellite connection, through satellite communication purposes towards our ground station. And so it's fused then with the data that we provide to our customers. So both option exists. I do not know of a lot of use cases of the first case that you were mentioning about a vessel that takes the AIS and relays it around itself. But I know it's definitely something that some people have done. Does that answer your question, Paul?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for that. Yeah.
Great.
Over to Norma Sarah.
Hi, Emmanuel, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about exact tracks technology. I'm familiar with it, but I was wondering what this plans with Inspire with it.
Thank you, Norma, for this question. It's really interesting. I'm not the expert on this domain. We have some colleagues that have been working on exact tracks from exact website, but I know about it definitely. So what exact tracks is, it's a type of transmitter that has been developed within Exactive to not replace but supplement for small fisheries, small fishing vessels, the capacity of sharing the location of where they are going fishing. And the main reason for that, what was the idea behind it, is that we've seen in some areas, for example, in Africa, that a lot of fishermen go on fishing expedition a bit farther and further from the coast, and their family gets worried about where they are, what's happening, if there is some kind of accident going on. They do not know what's going on. They do not know what's happening. So by the use of those transmitters, they can still relay a position, an AIS position for their families, for their clothes, and for the fishing organization in those countries to monitor what's happening. So it provides a tool to help locate small fisheries, small fishing vessels, and it is similar to a VMS system, but it's not a VMS system in itself. It doesn't have all the authoritative aspect of VMS, but it's a way for small vessels to have access to some sort of AIS capabilities. If you want a little bit more details, I can definitely put you in contact with the experts of those exact tracks within our company for sure.
Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, and maybe to that end, Emmanuel, if you would be willing to put your contact information into the chat, and then if people do have additional follow-up questions, maybe they could reach out to you directly if you're okay with
Definitely.
that.
No, I didn't raise a hand, sorry. Yeah, I'll do that directly in the chat. That would be possible.
Thank you. I had one more question I wanted to ask, and you'd mentioned in your presentation about sometimes vessels turn off their AIS, and I've heard of this before. Is there any sort of a mechanism within AIS to alert someone that a vessel is turning their AIS off? Because I guess that increases the risk of some sort of accident or possibly some illegal activity that could be of concern to governments or other ships. So is there a way to know?
Yeah, I know it's a very tricky question. Unfortunately, not to my knowledge, no. AIS is an active monitoring system, and what I mean by active is that the emitter needs to be willing to share its information. Even though there are regulations for some vessels to share their position, we have seen in the past that sometimes it doesn't happen. So it's quite tricky to figure it out. With more and more coverage of satellites around the globe, we're able to detect when a vessel stops emitting when it should be emitting with some algorithms, or using what I was mentioning earlier with analysis of radio frequencies that are beyond the AIS aspect, because each vessel is emitting some sort of frequency, some sort of communication system on board. And so there are technologies to detect vessels through that, things that we are developing. Yeah, unfortunately, AIS was not conceived with the idea originally to have that, to my knowledge.
And I guess that's one of the challenges of trying to use a system for something it wasn't actually intended to do. You encounter these little hiccups.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes.
That's probably like the main challenge, but it's also, there's a lot of opportunities using it. So it's yeah, we have to find the right balance.
Mm-hmm. So last call for any questions for Emmanuel on his presentation or anything about Spire or satellite AIS in general. And seeing, oh, we've got one more hand. Geneviève, go ahead.
Bonjour, Emmanuel, je peux parler en français?
Oui, c'est correct pour moi.
Oui, OK. Les signaux AIS que vous recevez, vous pouvez les partager?
Les partageons, nous les vendons, c'est notre business Aspire. C'est ce que nous faisons comme service, en effet, oui.
OK. Est-ce que c'est possible d'avoir votre contact dans le chat?
Oui, c'est ce que je vais mettre juste après. On a discuté avec Megan. Je vais mettre mon contact et puis vous pouvez me contacter après pour plus d'informations.
OK, parfait. Merci beaucoup.
Avec plaisir.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your participation today, Emmanuel, and sharing your knowledge and enlightening us a little bit more about AIS and how it's. All right, it's 10:02, so welcome back, and I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker to you. Next, we're going to be hearing from Rob Marshy with GSTS, or Global Spatial Technology Solutions. And Rob is the CTO, which I'm going to assume stands for Chief Technology Officer, but Rob, feel free to correct me if I get that wrong. Yeah. He has 30 years of experience in advanced technology development and naval systems solutions. He's managed numerous multi-million-dollar advanced technology programs, and prior to joining GSTS, Rob was a senior program engineer with the Department of National Defense, and then before that, a system engineer with the Royal Canadian Navy. So lots of very interesting experience to share with us. So I will hand it over to you to share your presentation, Rob.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction. So I will share my screen here and let me know when you can see it, please.
I can see that. Go ahead.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, thank you. This actually is great timing, the way you've arranged it, because what I'm going to talk about here is going to be a presentation and a demonstration of, in part, Spire data. Actually, many of the things that Emmanuel was speaking about we're doing, and they've been implemented in Oceania. And we're actually ingesting Spire data right now, real time, globally, and have been since it was exact Earth data for, gosh, at least a good 10 years now, when the first satellites were going up. So this is perfect, a perfect segue. And many of the questions and issues that the audience brought up, I hope to address as well, and to build on what Emmanuel was speaking about. So it's perfect. So this is about Oceania. It's an AI platform that really focuses, and I'll focus today on the maritime risk and geointelligence aspect. And so who are we? GSTS, Global Spatial Technology Solutions, is a Canadian company headquartered in Halifax, and we focus on maritime AI. And we have about 35 dedicated scientists and engineers. So AI platform, what does it do? Quite simply, integrates multiple streaming data sources. AIS, of which now everybody's an expert, is one of the core data sources. And then Oceana extracts patterns, and using that provides domain awareness and intelligence to support all kinds of things from in various aspects. And where are we on the data value chain? So we're not a satellite provider whatsoever. We're not a data provider. We actually ingest, purchase satellite data, including the Spire data set, and apply the advanced analytics and deliver it as a capability to the user community. So we really focus on that. Oceana is data agnostic, and it's ingesting about roughly 10 plus data sources at various stages, either real time or periodically. And all of this data, whether it's regulatory static data or real-time data or meteorological data, is all used to extract patterns. And that is used, that same data and those same patterns are used for both risk management and vessel management. So it's kind of a dual application. It is a dual application platform. Now, all of these capabilities are built as modules. And what I'll show you today is a specific application with specific modules focused on risk. And all of these have been built over the past several years with engagements from Transport Canada in the early days, NRC, Canadian Space Agency, DND, DRDC, many Government of Canada agencies, SDTC programs as well, have really helped us and worked with us to build it. Plus, over the last year and a half, has been actually used and tested by those agencies who have provided fantastic input to make it better. So everything that Oceana is built on is all based on real users, and we're talking about, several dozens of different types of users. So how do we approach risk? So here's the thing. From my background as well, when I was an electronic warfare analyst back in the day, risk is always changing. So the users are the ones really working with the risk, right? And so through an engagement process and an agile development, the idea is to develop an evolving solution that can match the evolving risk using evolving data. So we're constantly, continually looking for new data sets and exploring what can be extracted out of them to provide the user with actionable intelligence. And in terms of how we handle risk, well, of course, there has to be some kind of detection, some kind of analysis and evaluation, and that's the real risk assessment portion. Then some kind of prioritization and action. And so all of that is built into Oceana so that they can see, observe, orient, and decide all in one platform. So in terms of risk and what we're looking at, there are many different types. Here's some examples. There are national security risks, there are regulatory risks, legal and commercial risks. So you can see that a risk for one person is actually normal behavior potentially for another person, depending on who you are. Hence the need to make it reconfigurable, which Oceana is. So how can we do this? So we look at the whole data space, which these days, fortunately, is very rich. There's a lot of data out there. There are hundreds and hundreds of satellites. There are over 100 from Spire alone, for example. And from all of that data, you get a whole pile of information. And so what we started off with in the early days was really looking at anomalies. It's like, oh, an anomaly represents something of interest, but an anomaly isn't necessarily a risk, right? It's like the game of Clue. Colonel Mustard or whoever he was with the wrench or with the lead pipe in the living room doesn't necessarily represent a risk, but combined with other things through deduction can represent a risk. And that's where we look at behavioral patterns. So behavioral pattern anomalies, this is where the AI comes in very, very strongly to extract patterns over time from the global data sets. And out of that is going to be you'll find some risks. And of course, you'll notice the risk circle here is actually partially outside the data space because we have to be cognizant of the fact that we're going to miss some risks. We'll catch some, but you're never going to find them all. And that's just the reality of dealing with global data. And risk, as I mentioned earlier, is really in the eye of the beholder. So in terms of this global data, so here's a representation of AIS data, global AIS data. This is a screenshot. It's also important to be aware that, when we're looking at data as a community, that we're not seeing everything. It looks like we can, and we can delude ourselves into thinking, hey, we're seeing everything. We've got a world view here. But here's an example. You're actually not seeing 7,000 plus vessels that actually turned off their AIS. So of course that's a problem, because as soon as anybody wants to do something really nefarious, the first thing they're going to do, I shouldn't say the first thing, one of the things they may do is turn off their AIS. So turning off of AIS is actually a signal, and that's actually information that we use. So looking at these patterns and looking at some use cases, there's a matrix in the lower left there that you can see that looks at over 20 parametric behaviors represented as parameters. And all of these are combined, and through an AI approach, the behavior pattern is characterized to match with various activities, different types of fishing. It could be contraband, smuggling, or it could simply be normal behavior. And that's what's really important, is looking at all the behavior together. And then once you have that, of course, you have to do something with it. So Oceana, as you'll see, has built-in communication and collaboration capabilities in it. And we put it all together. This is where you could potentially, and not all of this is productionized at the moment. Most of it is, some of it's in prototype. You can actually detect the dark vessels. You can get notifications. You can actually detect vessels that are leaving their normal route for that vessel. You can track them in their transit using various satellite imagery techniques, depending on which ones you have access to through Oceana. You can detect them even when they've gone dark or they've turned on again. You could actually detect their radio frequency transmissions, whether it's radar or actually handheld radios can now be detected by satellite, and I'll show you a data snapshot of what that looks like. You can even task a satellite to take an image based on where Oceana predicts that vessel should be in 6, 8, 10 hours from now, and then generate an intelligence report. And through your partners, because we can't work in silos, that's something the entire community learned since 9/11. Everybody has to work together. You can have a partner, one of your partner agencies can launch a drone, and you could put all that together through Oceana and take the appropriate action. So that's the benefit of AI-based maritime domain awareness. What we'll look at in a few moments is the application of Oceana. Oceana also has dashboards. It also can provide intelligence as a service. So in other words, Oceana can ingest external data, even users' data, apply algorithms, extract intelligence, and then return it as a feed or as a layer to a user. And that's important because some users are very sophisticated, already have an infrastructure, and want to augment what they have using the AI that Oceana can apply to their data or report. Oh, and by the way, please, if there are any questions, anytime you can interrupt as well, or we can wait till the end. I'm flexible that way, just so you know. Okay, so now we'll look at a demo. Is any questions so far in the presentation? I went through very quickly. It was more slides. It was I had to reduce them, of course, but I'm happy to go deeper in any of those areas, either now or during the demo. Okay, so here's the demo. Here's Oceana looking at this region of interest in real time. This is what these little white dots, of course, are representing real-time AIS transmissions. And you can go, there are multiple logins, and we have multiple users using it. We have users in the Navy, actually, and the Canadian Armed Forces looking at it specifically through an Arctic viewer. So what I'll do is I will go through the various data sources and then go through a couple of use cases with this demo. So in terms of the Arctic, you can see here, this is actually real-time ice data. And that explains why in manual linear situation, as you said correctly, you won't see a lot of ships up here, some special transmitter units, some scientists doing some special tests. But apart from that, and icebreakers with the right polar class, you're not going to see too much traffic. But when you do, here's a heat map of the traffic that is up north, so you can see quite readily what's up there. You can also see the bathymetry, which is the depth of the water represented as well. So that's one layer. It's also possible to look at multiple weather, real-time weather layers as well, which is really part of your situational awareness. You can look at clouds, precipitation, and so on. It's just updating the weather layer right now. There we go. It's cloudy through a lot of Canada. I'm just going to turn that off because it's in the interest of time. Navigation charts, even marine mammals. The Oceania has the facility to ingest and display marine mammal sightings because that's part of navigation, and it's all part of the whole picture, right? So ships are going to be their behavior is important to see it contextually, which includes weather, ice, currents, tides, and of course whales, because many responsible shippers are avoiding whales as well, or want to avoid whales, and so this is another capability in Oceania. Oceania can also ingest sensor data and also ice data for ice management. So it's a multi-data ingestion and analytics tool. I'll also show you quickly here some imagery before I click on it, and then I'll click on a specific vessel and we can see what we can do. So in terms of imagery, it's possible to look at various layers of imagery. It's cloudy in Buffalo at the moment, and Oceania is ingesting these routinely from various satellite providers. In this case, it's Sentinel. Or we can go all the way to the West Coast and see through a different radar, which is Sentinel for radar sat, and we can see through the clouds, and we can see ships, and it's possible also to correlate. So when a ship turns its AIS off, you can actually still see the ship through the clouds right down to the actual ship. And Oceania has algorithms for ship detection. Furthermore, if let's say, I'll talk about satellite RF in a few minutes. So any questions on this so far? Because I'm really flying through this pretty quickly, but I believe this answers some of the questions that people are asking about combining AIS with other sources. And I'll show you as an example how that can potentially work. So you saw how it can detect dark vessels. I will show you here an image of a detected ship, which is in prototype. We can detect a ship in the Straits of Juan de Fuca and see that there is a ship detection there from a ship that should have been transmitting, but wasn't, and it's evident in radar satellite. So by combining the fact that the AIS turned off, which, as I mentioned, is actually information, and combining that with other sources, it's possible to detect ships and track them even when they've gone dark, as they say. So once you see a ship that you're interested in as well, let me just zoom out a little bit, and then I'll talk about some of the specific risk algorithms. You can actually tag a ship here and look at it. We'll look at the risk report. I'll turn off the risk for a moment, and you'll see all the ships again. And then I'll go to the risk window here. We'll talk about risk a little bit. So this is a collection of advanced risk algorithms. We had COVID. It still works, but it's not as necessary anymore because every ship's going to come up as a potential COVID infectious ship, but it is a infectious disease algorithm, which is, of course, really important when you want to make sure that trade remains smooth. There is a country of interest detection algorithm. So what it does is it detects if a ship has visited that country's territorial waters. There's also an AIS anomaly detection algorithm, which I find very interesting. It doesn't just detect when a vessel turns off its AIS, it detects when there's an inappropriately low amount of AIS messages coming from that ship. And that's really important because if you just look at a simple threshold, you will be inundated with thousands of vessels that, for whatever reason, maybe there was interference, maybe it was bad weather, maybe there were so many ships in that area, there was a bit of a signal interference between the ships. But what this algorithm does is adaptively and in real time, dynamically detects when ships have a suspiciously low transmission rate. It's almost like a dark vessel. And then also there's another algorithm that works out in the open ocean for detecting ships that have come together, in a certain way, slowed down. And so when that behavior has been detected, it's an indication of a rendezvous, which of course is interesting. So what I'll look at right now, though, is we'll look at ships that have been to, for example, Russia, because it's in the news. And for example, could be any country that you choose. And so here's a vessel here, which satisfies that criteria. And you can actually look at the vessel risk report and see that it was in Vladivostok on the 13th of February. And it is not rendezvoused, and its AIS transmission is normal. So as a user, whether you're with CBSA, Coast Guard, Transport Canada, you can take that information and communicate it, share it, or export it, or just tag that vessel right here as a vessel of interest, and you're going to check back tomorrow. And you have some continuity that way, and you add it to your vessels of interest. Or you can set up a geofence line, which is active right now. And actually, as we've been speaking, I've been getting geofence alerts. So here's one right here, for example. They come not only in the application, but they come in an actual email. So here's an example of a vessel email geofence alert. So these are operational, and you get all the information on the vessel and what it's been up to and where it is. And those alerts can be customized as well. So if I set up another one, I'll show you really quickly. I think we have a little bit of time. I could set up a geofence line right here to detect when that, I'll just call it test, when that test 99, and when that vessel crosses that line. And you could filter it as well. You can decide how long you want it to last. You can get an email notification or not. You can get concise or verbose information. You can also filter it and say, look, you know what? I'm only interested in that vessel, not all vessels. So I'm going to copy its MMSI and just keep an eye out for that vessel. And there we have a new geofence. I'll have to give it a name, call it 99. And there, so we've created a new geofence for that vessel in particular. So it gives you a real ability to control and decide and work with your players on what's happening. You can send a chat as well to your partners and share information that, a vessel, I could send a message to anyone who's online that a vessel is actually there. I could also, if I believe something's happening, it could be an environmental concern. Maybe there was a bit of an oil spill with this vessel or another vessel. I could actually create an incident file. And again, I have to give credit to CBSA, Coast Guard, and the Navy for all these ideas. This all comes from them. And we could actually look at create an incident by adding an area, information, a marker, upload files, and actually see all of that on the map. And that's 99. And there we go. So I can create this incident, and it becomes an ongoing like a case file. So this is called case. This is a different one, but I'm pretending to add information here. And then once I'm happy with the information I added, I can actually share it with the same people that I can chat with, and they can add to it. And we could collaboratively build up this situational awareness by working together, because somebody from another floor or another agency or another department can add information that I may not have had. So in terms of all of the information, as I said, just to summarize, Oceana as this platform can be accessed through this application. It is a multi-data ingestion tool. The core data set is actually AIS, and then it's complemented through a bunch of other data sets to extract a full intelligence picture and it's also a monitoring and notification tool, as well as a collaboration platform. So that's a lot. I'm open to questions. If anybody has anything, we can take a deeper dive in any one of these particular areas.
Well, thank you so much, Rob. I know I am just full of questions, but I will hold those just for a moment and see if there's anybody else on the call who would like to ask anything of you. And thank you so much for the fascinating look at the Oceana platform. Looks like it's got a lot of potential.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, well, seeing nobody at the moment, as this is based on AIS, what level of cleaning or verification do you do to the AIS data before you incorporate it into this platform?
Oh, that's a really good question, because AIS data, I'll show you a vessel track here, for example. Go to vessel information, a lot. So the AIS data is inherently messy. And so there are a lot of people, a lot of companies all over the world who figure, you know what, we'll just get that data and we'll start working with it. It's really challenging. We actually spent a couple of years building up really good AIS cleaning techniques. There's data missing, there's false data. When does that false data matter? When does it not matter? How much data should you keep? And here's an example of that, of a track, for example. So you can zoom in and you can see the messages. There's some message gaps here. You can click on it and actually look at the median time between messages. That's about 10 minutes for this particular vessel. And yeah, so and of course you can see everything going back several months if you wanted to, for where that vessel is being. Or you could also look at its port history and see all the places this vessel has been in the last year. You could also see where it spent the most time. So it spent a lot of time in Poland and Tunisia and Spain. And you can see exactly where it was, the ports it visited. So all of that data is put together for pattern analysis purposes, or you can export it, for example, to a CSV and do some further analysis, maybe using other tools. Because it's really important to, I think, to constantly provide the tools and the data to the right users to see what they can do with it. And the users are constantly, again, whether it's Transport Canada, CBSA, Coast Guard, Navy, they're continually coming up with new ideas that we implement and roll out on a monthly basis. So this is build 84, and at the end of the month, there'll be hopefully another build 85, and Oceana keeps growing like that, and that's really important. That was a long answer to your question, but
thank you. I appreciate that. So I'm seeing Megan Carr's hand next. Go ahead, Megan.
Hi, so thank you so much for your talk. I personally study vessel strike risk using AIS data
cool.
and apply that to endangered whale species around here.
Oh.
And I was wondering, it sounds like primarily you have government users currently. I was wondering about possibilities for scientists using this tool, or what your target audience is, things like that.
Okay, that's an exciting question. So I focused on the government for this talk, but we're actually split pretty 50-50. So the Port of Montreal is actually using this enhanced ETA, estimated time of arrival calculator, which I didn't even show because I was focusing on the risk. So this machine language based predictive tool, for ETAs, was selected by Montreal after a test of about 5 or 6 global contenders, and they picked Oceana's for having. So I had a little brag there about a commercial user selecting Oceana for its based on actual performance. Yeah, we have commercial users as well, and we have a project that's ongoing that we call Smart Whales. It's a collaborative project that involves the detection of whales and actually uses the whales' feeding sites. Those can be detected by satellite and uses a predictive model to predict where the whales can be. So if you get in touch, we have people on that project who would be, I'm sure, very happy to share things with you. And that's a collaborative project as well. There's a scientist in Germany, one at Dalhousie University, and it's an exciting project that's important to us.
That's great. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Yeah, please, I'll leave my coordinates and get in touch, and we'll connect you with the people on the project and go from there.
Thanks, Rob. We have a question via chat from Melanie Hunt, who's asking if this can be used as a port control system to schedule vessels or bill agents. And it sounds like the Port of Montreal is one of your users. And
oh yeah, so I'm super glad you asked. Absolutely. So that we actually have a very advanced sequence planning tool, which I'll see if I could log into now. That is, so the short answer is yes, 100%. It's called the sequence planning tool. It is being tested in various ways by the Port of Montreal, Laurentian Pilotage Authority, Port of Halifax, we're very involved with, and also the Port of New York. And it absolutely, it's algorithm-based, simulation-based to optimize times of arrival and to optimize coordination through predictive analytics to ensure the optimum use of resources, be they tugs, berths, and so on. So that just takes a while to run up. But yeah, we do have it. It's this year, and if you wanted more information, we're happy to follow up with this as well. You can see that simulation takes. It's still getting data because it hasn't been run today. So yeah, absolutely, this is actually being evaluated with the Port of Halifax. Does that answer your question, Melanie? Is that sort of in the ballpark of what you were thinking about? Was it Melanie or Melody?
it was Melanie. Yes, she says thank you.
Okay.
I think our next question is from Paul Blamaris. And go ahead, Paul.
Hi, Rob. Good to see you again. And
hi, Paul. Yeah, you too.
I'm so glad that we're finally getting to do this webinar. So I have lots of questions for you, but I'll confine my question to one, which I'm pretty sure quite a few people are interested in. You mentioned the vessel tracks algorithms, and I wondered whether, and you sort of showed a connecting the dots. And I wondered whether you would be willing to share a bit more about how you've developed this algorithm, because the age-old problem is, as you pointed out, you have a gap in the data, and what happens when you connect the dots, the line goes across the land. What do you do with that? Perhaps you can expand a bit how you've come to a solution for not predicting ships going across the land, because I think that's quite a common occurrence, especially when there's little AIS receiver black spots, where there's no reception, and it happens around confined waterways, and it's always a difficult one to deal with. So I'd be interested.
That's right, Paul. Absolutely, that's a great point. We actually used to run into that quite frequently, and it turns out that when we were here's some here. So I tried to find one that demonstrates what you're referring to. So what we're finding actually, Paul, is that the situation is improving, but it's not perfect. And so we have an algorithm that does an interpolation. So this actually is real data. So just last year, Spire has in the last year has really improved their, thanks Manuel, by the way, they've really improved their data flow. So it's occurring less and less. But at the same time, Oceana has algorithms that can interpolate provide reasonable interpolation. And that's because Oceana also has, in prototype mode, a routing algorithm, and a lot of work went into that. And a lot of work went into ensuring that the predicted routes weren't going overland. But it was a problem, and my experience is that it's becoming less and less of a problem, because the data used to be very sparse, and today it's pretty phenomenal. So yeah, and because this is actually combining terrestrial, I'm trying to find another example here where it's going over land. Because the data that we're subscribing to from Spire actually includes a combination of terrestrial and space, we're seeing that less and less. So it's sort of a long-winded answer, Paul, but it's a combination of the data got better and plus our algorithm got better.
And if I can follow up then, so then when you provide that, because obviously an interpolated data point is very different to a real reported data point. So for instance, if somebody was trying to use this in terms of marine mammal collision avoidance or vessel close calls, it's quite important that you report that's interpolated data point, not an actual reported data point.
Yeah. So and what you're seeing here, that's an excellent point, and thank you for mentioning that. So what you're seeing here is actually not interpolated data. There's the ability to use interpolated data, which was more on the route planning side, but here I can assure you, to your point, which is really important, this is actual data. The interpolation is the line here, which you can see brushes land. So I think it's an example of what you're talking about. Right here, which we know the ship didn't do that. And this is there's no assumption in terms of the actual data, which is, as you say, really important. If you're trying to investigate, what actually happened, then that's really important.
Yeah, it looks great. It looks like you've got some great metadata there on the, when you clicked on that, telling you all of the gaps between the reports and everything.
Yeah, exactly. So you can make an intelligent inference. Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
So next we have a really great question from JD Leahy asking about the ship detection tool. And is this program also able to detect towed barges? Because one of the issues with understanding risk and smaller vessel traffic is barges aren't required to carry AIS. So you can track the tug, but you don't really know what the barge is up to.
Oh yeah, that's really interesting. So you don't, because the barge won't have AIS. So what I'd recommend in that sort of situation is to set up Oceana in such a way that the imagery is coming in on a frequent basis in your area of interest. So a use case for that would be, let's say you're in charge of a port or a certain region. So you would take pictures and supplement it. But that's 100% correct. You'll have ships towing things, and we've seen them in the imagery. So the towing ship will have AIS, but not necessarily the towed item. And so that's where using multiple data comes in to be useful, whether it's imagery, hyperspectral, electro-optical, or radar in that case.
I'd noticed another hand that seems to have been put down, so maybe the question was already answered, but if you put down your hand inadvertently, please go ahead and can raise it again. Another question I hope that you could maybe speak to, Rob, is, we've been hearing a lot in the news about the challenges around the supply chain. We've got ships waiting at anchor. We're seeing additional accidents and incidents and occurrences of problematic behavior by vessels as they're waiting for their berths or to load or unload. Is there any way that Oceana can help with managing the supply chain?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, and in several ways. So in terms of behavior, you bring up one. So we have an anchorage management and anchorage detection capability that's in Oceana does. So you can see ships that are at sometimes harmful anchorage sites. For example, I'll see if I could find one. No, that's just a tug. It's not too bad. There aren't too many ships at anchor right now, but I'll show you because I bet you this one is. So one of those things, as you mentioned, when ships are waiting because the ports are full, they go to anchor, and the anchors always drag the sea floor to a certain extent and can be very, very harmful. And there have been complaints from people living in this area about the anchor. So the anchorage detection is based on classic patterns that ships display while they're at anchor. So this is the actual data from the ship. Ships always swing in the current and the tide when they're at anchor, and it forms a circular pattern. So that's one aspect. Then the other aspect is really about flow through in general. So thanks, Krista. Krista sent me in the chat here. I don't know if any of you noticed, Krista, who's on the call here, sent me the sequence planning tool link that's actually in production version. The sequence planning tool here is exactly what the ports and the industry is asking for, because ships hurry up and then wait. And there's no point, steaming across at 20 knots only to wait and go to a sketchy anchorage site and wait for 6 days until you finally get to go into port. It's a big waste of a ship's time. It's a big waste of fuel. It contributes a lot of GHGs, and it's not helping the port at all. So this sequence planning tool, which has been developed in cooperation with some of the commercial players I mentioned, and right now the Port of Halifax, alleviates that challenge. So you can correctly and optimally optimize and prioritize the entry of the vessels based on various criteria that are important to you as a port, based on, so that you can meet your challenges. So that's a great question. It's a real dance between pilots and tugs and cranes and terminals, and of course it goes beyond that. And we're now looking at rail, and of course trucks are pivotal. So it's a whole chain, and we're really excited by how Oceania, applying these same analytics that apply to risk and vessel track, also applies to the supply chain. We're really excited to be working with our partners in this area.
And speaking of partners, I think you've touched on a few previously. So who's currently using, or what types of organizations are using Oceania at the moment, and how do you hope to expand that? Who do you think this could be really useful for?
Yeah, so I would, using the two broad groupings in the government, we've got CBSA is using it, Border Services, right, for multiple use cases. The Navy is they have before, and they're about to again, actually in a seagoing capacity. We actually have Oceania installed on a supply ship at the moment for fuel optimization. We've got Coast Guard is looking at their own use cases, which have to do with sovereignty. We have a Canadian Forces user that's looking at it for the Arctic. So they have a real-time, we call it the Arctic Domain Awareness viewer. It's a instance of Oceania that's focused on all of these things applied to the Arctic. So they're using that right now. And that's on the government side. And that is expanding as we go at the speed of contracts, but it's going quite nicely, actually. And then the other area, we've got the Port of Montreal, and we've got prototype testing and development with the Port of Montreal, and also very much the Port of Halifax, and also the Port of New York and Laurentian Pilotage Authority. Those are the ones who are using it either in beta mode or using aspects of it operationally, and also helping to develop the tool to solve some of these global problems.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that presentation, Rob. That was really interesting, and being able to actually explore the platform a little bit was great. So I recognize we're at the end of our time for today, and if there's any additional questions, I mean, maybe you can, if you put your details in the chat as well, people could reach out to you directly if they want to connect and find out more. And I just wanted to very briefly mention to everyone, our next session in this series of webinars is going to be focused on who's using AIS and how for different aspects, because we've got academics that use AIS data to understand shipping activity and risk. We've got government, communities, especially through the Transport Canada's EMSA program, Enhanced Marine Situational Awareness. So if you know of anybody, or if you yourself are using AIS data for whatever purpose, please let me know if you'd be interested in sharing how you've been using it, what you've learned, problems you've encountered, and we're hoping to run a few more webinars focusing on how AIS is being used and how we can learn from different use cases to get better at this. So we will be sharing a link to this recording, and the presentations will be posted on our website, and I'll email that out afterwards to all registrants. And thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Great talks, fellows. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day.